Audible is my road trip companion.
It's kind of my quiet alone time.
Audible is a routine for me.
It's like a fun night school for adults.
I could easily be seduced into locking myself in a place where I do nothing but listen to books.
I never was interested in historical fiction before, but I'm obsessed with it now.
There are a lot of like classic and big titles that I feel like I missed out. Since I don't have time to read, might as well listen.
If I want to catch up on the news or history or learn what's going on in the world, I can download a book and listen to it.
Because I listened to her story over and over again, I made the decision to go ahead and follow my own dream, which was to help other veterans.
I think there's like 180 books in my library now. It changes your perspective. It makes you a different person.
It's true. It's so true.
Download Audible and start listening today.
Hello and welcome. Thank you all for tuning in to the 25th Annual Festival of Books and our virtual event, All Hail Contemporary Romance. I'm Elissa Sussman. I'm your moderator for tonight's event. I write books for teens and adults. My YA novel will be out next fall from Simon & Schuster, and my first adult novel will be released in spring 2022 from Ballantine Books. I am so excited to talk to these three incredible writers. Joining us tonight are best-selling and award-winning authors Jasmine Guillory, whose new book, Party of Two, is the fifth in a series, Casey McQuiston, the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue, and Rebekah Weatherspoon with her just-released If the Boot Fits. Tonight, we'll be discussing their very modern romance novels filled with smart, witty, and intelligent heroines and heroes. Before we get into our conversation, I want to remind everyone to support your local independent bookseller during this festival. The Ripped Bodice is our seller for this event, and they have signed book plates available. Please visit their site to buy books and keep an eye out for some fun holiday gifts they'll be offering this year. And now, on to our panel. Jasmine, Casey, and Rebekah, welcome.
Hi.
I am so excited to talk to you guys about romance. I feel like that's what we need right now.
Yeah.
I would love to start by giving you each a chance to introduce yourself and your work. I figured we'd start with Rebekah, then go to Jasmine, and then Casey. If you guys could just tell us about your latest book in a sentence or two.
Hi, I'm Rebekah Weatherspoon. My most recent book is If the Boot Fits. It's a modern Cinderella retelling set right here in Southern California.
Jasmine?
I'm Jasmine Guillory. My most recent book, Party of Two, is about, it's the fifth of my books. It is about a woman who moves to LA and almost immediately starts dating a senator and all of the things that come out of that.
Casey?
Yeah, I'm Casey, and I guess my most recent book would be Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is a queer rom-com about the First Family and the royal family. Yeah, it's fun times.
Lots of fun banter and romance in all of these books, which were a delight to read. So I'm so excited to just talk to you about your books. And let's start with your personal history with romance. I'd love to start with Casey and then Rebekah and Jasmine. If you could just say a little bit about how you were introduced to romance as a reader, if there was a particular book or author that sparked your interest, and what inspired you to make the eventual transition from reader to writer. So we start with Casey.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have a sister who's like 8 years older than me, and she's like a voracious reader. And when she was younger, she would buy a lot of like supermarket romance novels when she was like still living at home, and she would like have them in her room. And I remember being like 12 years old and like sneaking into her room and stealing like, I think it was like a Janet Ivanovich romance novel. It was like one of like the, like, I think like Full Tilt or something. And I don't think that's like necessarily like I don't know if that was the first romance I ever read, but it's the one that sticks out in my memory most of the first time. I was like, whoa, this is a thing that people do. This is like a thing that people write. That's so cool. And I remember like hiding away in my room with this like super, to me, like very explicit romance novel. Like, ooh, this is my little secret in my room. And from there, it was just kind of like whatever I could get my hands on. And I don't think it was not like a conscious decision to write romance as much as it just like really became apparent that it was just what I do. Because when I was like a teenager, I got really into, YA fantasy, and I thought that was what I wanted to do. And I realized that the only part of that I was good at was actually the relationships and the love stories within the story. And I was like, you know what? That is a genre. I could just write that. That's a great genre that I love. And so that's kind of how I found my way to it.
Rebekah?
I don't have that story. I feel like so many romance writers got started early, and I was like really, really late to the party. I was working on a web series for Disney, and one of our executives was like, okay, I need someone in the office to read this book because I want to see what the youths are talking about. And the book he gave me was Twilight. And so I read it, and I was like, oh, I had been reading a lot of, assigned for school type books that I just kind of had to get through, or really just read the Spark Notes. And so I read it, and I was like, oh, that's the first book I've read in like a night, read in like one sitting. And one of the women in my office was like, oh, have you read any fan fiction yet? And I was like, what's this fan fiction business you're talking about? So she put me onto a fan fiction site, and I started reading Twilight fan fiction, and then I started writing it. And some of the awesome women I met through that, they were so eager to give me other romance novels. That was what was so fun about it. They weren't like, oh, let's just talk about Twilight. They were like, no, you have to read this person. You have to read this person. You have to read this person. So they were just dumping books in my lap, and that was great. So after that, I was like, oh, I'm reading a book a day. And never before in my life have I been reading that much. And those same friends, they were reading my fan fiction, and they were just really supportive. My friend Erica, who I was just texting with yesterday, she was like, you're good at this, and I really think you should give this a try. And I did, and here we are.
Jasmine?
It's funny because I had an early start to romance too. I went to summer camp. I think I was 12 or 13, and my roommate brought this like enormous crate of romance novels to summer camp, and I was like, that's interesting. And I read a bunch of them then, but then I sort of didn't read a lot of romance for a while after that. I think because I tended to read the books that like my mom had around, or that she would get me from the bookstore or whatever, and my mom didn't read romance. And so I just kind of stopped reading romance for a while. And then I went back to it kind of on and off years later, but it wasn't until this was, I guess, 9 years ago, that I was going through a really hard time in my life. And so I kind of picked up a romance novel, and I was like, this is the perfect thing to read right now, because I know going in, it's not gonna stress me out. I'm not worried about the end. I don't have to worry that someone's gonna die. If there's like a puppy in this book, the puppy will be fine in the end, like all of that stuff. And so I just went on a romance reading binge, and I had been writing before that, but I'd been writing like young adult romance, so not, too far away. But I hadn't really thought of writing romance until I was reading so much of it, and I was like, oh yeah, this would be fun to write. But it took me a little while.
That's awesome. I want to get right into it, and let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex scenes. Because I know most people who are watching who have read romance or who write romance. You hear it described as by non-romance readers as porn for women. But I feel like sex scenes in romance novels are so much more. Also, there's nothing wrong with porn for women, I just want to say. But I think that sex in romance novels are really important. And I would love to hear you guys talk about how you approach sex scenes and how you use them in terms of plot and character development. And I'd love to start with Jasmine and then go to Rebekah and then to Casey. So Jasmine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because I really think about them in terms of where I am in the book, and where the characters are with one another. Like, is this the first time? Are they all excited, but they don't really know each other yet? Are they kind of in the midst of a relationship? Are they mad at each other? Like, what are their emotions about each other that might like change how their dynamic in the midst of it? And so I think like I don't write sex scenes in a vacuum. It's all about like who the characters are and where they are in that place, and where they are in a place with one another. And so that's something that I think about a lot as I'm writing sex scenes, and as I'm like, because they, they're in like the book is about a relationship, and so I want the sex scenes to play a role in that relationship, whether they're like fun and happy or kind of mad and sexy. Like all of those things can work.
Rebekah?
Yeah, I think out of the three of us, I might write the most graphic sex scenes. I'm gonna put that out there. I think I'm safe saying that. For me, I think I started writing pretty graphic actually. Like I came out of the gate with pretty explicit stuff. And I've written a little bit of everything. So paranormal and romantic suspense that's been pretty dark, all the way to romantic comedies that feature BDSM. And I think the way that I use sex scenes too has a lot to do with the pacing of the story. A lot of times when I outline my stories, I know I want to have a certain number of sex scenes to, honestly, meet reader expectation. I think even for a cowboy to remember, I knew some readers would be like, wow, like there's not sex on page 2. Mostly because the heroine has a traumatic brain injury, so I had to like give her a minute before we could get there. But I think a lot of readers expect that I'm going to have a lot of sex in my books. So for me, it's a craft issue for sure. And definitely, like what Jasmine said, it's really important for all of my sex scenes in all of my books to be different, because all of my characters are different. All of their partners are different. So what they need in a certain moment, do they need to laugh? Do they need to cry mid-orgasm? Is the sex bad? Do they need to just get something off their chest? So I think it really does depend on character and timing and all of that. But yeah, I like to pack them in there. No pun intended.
And I wish it had been pun intended. That's the main title of your next book.
I think for me, both of y'all have like made such great points about what sex scenes do for character and relationship developments in books. I think there's a lot that you can accomplish in a sex scene that it's hard to accomplish in a romance in any other way, just because of like the vulnerability of a moment like that, the amount of trust often involved like between the two characters or whoever many are involved in the scene. Then just, like, what does it reveal about the character? What does it reveal about the relationship? How does it like progress the dynamic? And like what about their dynamic and like the banter and every other part of the story is translated across into their sexual dynamic? And what does that tell you about the relationship and about the characters? And so I think that like sex scenes, like while like I am like 1000% in support of people just like having fun and getting off, like that's also great. And I love it. And it very much has a place in all romance. I think that, sex scenes are often not just there for that. They're often also there to do a lot of like really heavy lifting in the story and in the narrative and like in the like building of a really compelling emotional arc for your characters and for your pairing. And so like, yeah, I think that's what I love about romance is it's like you know, there are a lot of subgenres of romance that deal with suspense and different types of plots, but at the end of the day, you are trying to create a compelling story out of just two people and pointing them at each other, you know. And I think sex scenes are such like a wonderful, brilliant example of like how difficult it is to write good romance and how rewarding it is to read good romance.
I think that's a great point for sure. All three of you guys wrote in your latest book about a similar theme, which is fame. Jasmine, your heroine falls for a senator. Rebekah, your heroine falls for a movie star. And Casey, both of your characters are famous in their own right. And sort of the celebrity romance is a really fun romantic trope that we see a lot. But you guys sort of all put your own spin on it, which was so much fun to read. Can you speak about why you chose to explore that particular dynamic and how it ended up informing the story? Casey, we'll start with you and then move on to Jasmine and then Rebekah.
Sure. You know, for me, it wasn't necessarily that I love tropes. You know, I'm a student of tropes. I feel like every time I watch a movie or a TV show or read a book that I love, I go onto like tvtropes.org and I read every single entry that explains every single trope in that piece of work and like why it works. And so I like when I set out to write this book, what I was really like one of the things I was really doing was just like a deconstruction of different tropes that I loved. And so I loved like this Prince Charming trope, and I was like, you know, I feel like I've seen this subverted in so many ways, but I would like to subvert it in this way and like make it queer and explore it as like a queer story. And then I looked at like the trope that we kind of grew up with in the 90s of like how cool it would be to be the president's kid, which I was like a really big like subgenre of teen movies for a while in the 90s. And those were two like ideas that I was really into. And I when I first came up with the idea, it was actually during the 2016 election. And so we were all following that really closely. And I was thinking about, you know, all of these high profile worlds and how we see everything that they do and we see nothing that they do. And so much is behind closed doors and you just kind of infer what's going on. And there's just like a million stories that nobody ever knows about. And you think you know everything about this person as like a fan or a member of the public or whatever. And there's actually so much more to the story. Like I just find that fascinating. I love like, you know, like old Hollywood and stories like that. And so I really wanted to explore that. And I wanted to just kind of peel back some layers and like see like what could be going on behind the curtains. And I think that's like a really, really fun playground to play in. And there's so many layers that come with like exploring a character that's really, you know, famous or a high profile figure. And I kind of wanted to get into that, especially in the context of like queer history and what it means to be like queer in the public eye or queer as, you know, a major figure in history. And what like the legacy of that is, you know, going back through the years and generations. So yeah, so I felt like there was just like so much to explore, and you know, I'm sure y'all can get into even more of the different angles of it. It's really like an endless area that you can mess around with and explore different themes around. So it's fun.
Jasmine?
Yeah, I find like fame and the trappings of fame really interesting, and I think it is different depending on like kind of what direction that comes from. I have always been a political junkie. I used to work in politics. And so I've always been interested in kind of the idea of like the political spouse, right? Because it's so often, you know, especially when the spouse is a woman, it's like, you know, she's sort of like in the background, kind of colorless, supporting her husband. She, you know, she has a very kind of very female, like gendered career as like a librarian or a preschool teacher or something like that. And so I was interested in like, what would it be like if that you know, if the political girlfriend was someone very different than that, had ambition of her own, didn't want to kind of fall into that kind of role, and how would that relationship play out? Like, how would they, what would they decide to do about that? How would the politician himself react to her, not wanting to be that kind of, person in his life, and that kind of like bland, supportive character. So that was really the thing that drew me in to the story. And then it was just really fun to explore all of the nuances and all of the different things that would happen, especially with, with race and with like the way that politics is now with social media and the press and everything. So I found a lot of that stuff really fun and interesting to explore in fiction.
Rebekah?
So my series, the Cowboys of California, they're all based on fairy tales. So the Prince Charming thing was kind of built in. The first book is a Sleeping Beauty retelling, and then If the Boot Fits is a Cinderella retelling. So I feel like, especially if we're talking about, a prince archetype, especially in the Black community, you're going to be looking at like musicians and athletes and actors. And so I wanted to give this family kind of a foundation in Black Hollywood. The grandmother in the story, Miss Leona, she's, a grand dame of Hollywood. She's been acting for many, many years. And Sam, who is the youngest brother, he is also an actor. And I worked in film and television for a long time, and just kind of watching everything that's been going on in the last, 5 or 10 years, I was thinking a lot about, how Moonlight's win at the Academy Awards played out, Mahershala Ali's comments after Green Book, where he, thought the subject's family had signed off on the content of the movie and they hadn't. So I thought there was so much background I could give Sam as a Black actor on the rise who's trying to make a name for himself, but also has this legacy in his grandmother. And then I am also terrified of fame. So the idea of dating a famous person to me is like horrific. So, in Cinderella context, what would be more terrifying than being a very quiet assistant who is really used to blending into the background and falling in love with like, America's golden boy of the moment the night after his Oscar win. And then it turns out he has a heart of gold. Like it could only get worse from there, really. So I just thought, and I also was thinking also a lot about social media and how that plays into celebrity relationships now. I feel like social media has really, in a way, changed how the tabloid works, because celebrities are able to give us their own gossip in real time the way they want to. And also fans now are like Insta sleuths. Keke Palmer posted a picture of her kissing her boyfriend the other day, who actually might not even be her boyfriend. That's me just guessing. People found him on Instagram in like 36 seconds. It was insane. Everyone said very nice things, but it was just amazing how people were able to find him so quickly. So along with like the horrifying aspect of fandom, I couldn't imagine meeting my Prince Charming, he's famous, he's amazing, and then all of his fans find me in 2 minutes. That would just be the scariest thing ever. So there I had the challenge of making the love so great that she was able to tune all of that out.
That's great. You guys sort of touched on this a little bit, but romance has been changing and evolving, especially in the last 10 or so years. But it is still mostly dominated by white, straight Christian voices, which is very traditional. And yet it's kind of subversive in the sense that it centers female pleasure and desire. And I'd love to start with Jasmine and Rebekah and just talk about the importance of writing stories focused on Black joy and Black love, and specifically the pleasure and needs of Black women. So I'd love to start with Rebekah and then talk to Jasmine about that.
Yeah, so lucky for me, I am a Black woman, so that made that perspective kind of easy. To me, it was just kind of a no-brainer. Like again, from the beginning, I always knew that I wanted to include all kinds of women of color in my stories, and I hope I've done that. And in the last, 4 or 5 years, I've really been writing a lot of stories that focus on Black women, mostly because I'm really tired. And everything in the world is a lot right now. And I feel like as many stories as that I can put out there where Black women really are just being loved on. My book Rafe, that got a lot of attention, that I think a lot of people on the offset were like, oh, there's a really hot guy on the cover. But I think what really hooked people was the fact that this woman had a man in her life who he wasn't trying to overshadow her achievements, but he was trying to really support her and really love her a lot. And I think I've been, trying to do that for my queer heroines, my plus size heroines, my heroines that are lost, divorced, having fertility issues, all of that. Just showing readers this is what it looks like when you love a Black woman on the page. This is how easy it is to love a Black woman. And this is how important it is to love a Black woman. And I think, it seems like a no-brainer, but also extremely important at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I was in the midst of writing, I think it was my second book, it feels weird to say there was a lot going on then, because I did not know how much more there could be going on. But, it was in the midst of like one of the many protests that have been going on over the past like 4 or 5 years. And I remember thinking, because I was a lawyer before I started doing this, and I remember thinking like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm sitting here writing a book. Shouldn't I be out there in the streets, like doing something? And then I like took a break from writing, and I was reading a romance novel that was like by and about a Black woman. And it felt so revolutionary to me to like, in the midst of all of this, everything on the news that they talk about us is about like struggle and pain and all of the bad things. And it just felt so good for me to read a book that's just about like joy and love. And so it made me feel like, yes, I'm doing the right thing. Like, I want to put this out into the world. Like, we need more stories of joy and love about us. Both for me to read and to write, and for like people, for Black women to be able to read and like see themselves reflected on the page and in the world. And so it feels like every time I struggle, like I kind of bring myself back to that moment, and it just makes me happy that I can be doing this, both for myself and just like that I'm, I feel like we all need more joy to be out there in the world, especially about Black women. And so it makes me happy to be writing stories like this.
Casey, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about subverting like heteronormative expectations in romance, especially in writing a romance that isn't solely a coming out story, and how you approach that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like it all for me was rooted in the fact that I've been a rom-com fan my entire life. I think the first movie I ever saw in theaters was You've Got Mail, the first one I remember seeing. And I've always loved love stories. And I think it was really hard for me for a long time to find love stories that were completely 100% relatable to me, and that reflected my life and the lives of people I was spending my time around, and just what I wanted to be reflected by. And so I think what's really amazing about romance as a space, and something that we really owe to years and years of people self-pubbing, small press pubbing, like ebooks and everything, their own queer romance novels, is romance is a space that is a pleasure space. Like, it's just a space where you're allowed to have fun, and your characters are allowed to be happy and have a happy ending. And like, yeah, there's like, we'll probably need to fight at some point, but ultimately it can just be a place where the reader can have a good time. And I think that that's like what really makes queer romance so amazing, is because I feel like there's so few spaces that queer people in media are allowed to just like have a good time and not have to have, a sob story. Not that there's anything not wonderful about every range of the queer experience, but I think that it's so great that romance allows space for queer people to just enjoy themselves and have fun. And I think that when I'm writing, what I'm really trying to do is just like capture what I loved about rom-coms growing up, which is, those big cinematic moments of, like the end of 10 Things I Hate About You, and like they kiss in the parking lot and like Letters for Cleo is playing on like the school roof, and make that gay, And I think that when I was younger, if I had been able to watch 10 Things I Hate About You and Heath Ledger was like a hot butch lesbian, it would have really helped me understand some things about myself a lot sooner, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I want to have a good time, and I want to let other queer people have a good time, but I also at the same time I think try really hard in most of my stories, at least these 2 books I've finished so far, to thread in a lot of queer history, a lot of little Easter eggs and little like nuggets and homework assignments in the book. And then things that are just like shout outs to, kind of the legacy of what allows me to be able to sit here and write a queer romance novel, which is, even 10 years ago, to be traditionally published, with a queer romance novel would be unheard of, so yeah, I think what's also great about romance is increasingly, I think it's always been this, but we're starting to be more publicly aware of it. The fact that it's not just a space for women. Like a lot of romance readers, there's like tons of non-binary romance readers. There's tons of men who read romance now. There's people of all types of like every sexuality you can imagine who read romance. And I love the idea of there being more options for all of those different types of people of relatable love stories. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do. That's what a lot of people are trying to do. I think that's one of the things that's so cool about romance lately is I feel like more and more you're seeing, publishers take chances on these queer love stories that people have been trying to get a foothold to tell for like years and years and years. And I think, again, that's just a testament to how many different types of readers there are who love romance and who deserve and want to have a happy ever after to read. So
yeah, I love that term pleasure space to describe romance. I think it's so wonderful and very apt. Let's talk a little bit about men. All 3 of you have written from a male POV. Casey, your book is solely from Alex's perspective. Can you speak about the challenges of writing from male POV? And then I want to talk to Jasmine and Rebekah about switching between the 2.
Yeah, for me, I don't know, gender is a complicated subject for me. And I think for me, it is a pretty gray area personally. And so I think there are times when I find it kind of pretty easy to like call up like a male or like a dudely point of view, because I think that there are like elements and sides of me that are very dudely, and I like my partner calls me a bro all the time. But so for me, it was not as hard as I anticipated. I think like a cis man is inevitably going to be different for any AFAB person to write. But at the end of the day, I think every story is different and every character is different. And so it's really more about just like getting inside that character's head. And it also helps if you are, attracted to the gender that this person is attracted to, because then you can, it's sometimes easier to get into the headspace for attraction. But at the end of the day, if you know your characters really well and you're able to like really lock into their headspace, I think that you have the tools to build like a really, fully developed point of view for, all types of characters.
That's great. Jasmine and Rebekah, I'd love for you guys to talk about just the challenges of switching between POVs. and making each voice feel distinct and each character feel distinct. And, you know, if you have advice for writers out there who are attempting that, if we could start with Jasmine and then move on to Rebekah.
Yeah, I think my biggest challenge in switching between POVs is often figuring out which POV to be in it for any particular scene. So like, you know, it's easy when it's only one of them in a scene, but when they're both in the same scene, like whose story am I telling? Whose head am I going to be in? And so I have to really think through like, what emotions do I want to be reflected in this scene? Whose eyes do I want to see this through? And I think that's easier. There's, you know, a number of times, at least in every first draft, I've done a scene wrong where I write it and I'm like, yep, nope, that should have been in the other person's point of view. And so I think that to a certain extent, like you just have to do things wrong for a while before you kind of get it right. So for me, it's not so much about switching as it is about like kind of figuring out how to tell the story and whose story you want to be telling at any particular moment. Because I think that is the bigger hard thing about having two POVs is that you're telling two stories. And so it's in how to tell both stories and kind of interweave them. Because, you know, there's the love story that's the through line through all of it, but you're telling it through both, you know, from two sides. And so that is kind of the harder thing as to how to tell both sides of that story.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's definitely what like information I'm trying to get across. I've written single POV books as well, and some of my paranormals were single POV, and I think that was because I was trying to bring the reader into the world along with the character. And sometimes when you do dual POV in that situation, you're exposing the character to certain things. In my Beards and Bondage series, that has a limited dual POV. So Haven, the first book, it's actually the male POV for the bulk of the book, because he goes through actually a lot of trauma, but the least amount of trauma between the two of them. So I figured it would be easier for the reader to be in his headspace. And I was correct because my editor was like, wow, this is dark. And if I had written it from the heroine's point of view, it would have been much, much darker. But in that book, you know, I give Claudia one chapter for every 4 of Shep's. So it just depended on like how the story needed to be told. It's like a conversation with the reader. Like how do I want the reader to walk this journey? And then that way I can say like, well, this person needs to deliver this information. This person needs to deliver this information. And it makes it easier to craft the story that way.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about writing contemporary stories now in our complicated contemporary times. I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this panel who are lovers of romance have turned to romance novels for comfort during these stressful and uncertain times. I definitely have. Have you guys noticed any changes in the way that you've approached your work this year in particular, both what you're writing about and how your writing practice has changed or adapted? So let's start with Rebekah, then Casey, then Jasmine.
All my books this year were scheduled out pretty far, so I didn't really change anything on the schedule. But just a lot harder. It's a lot harder. My process is the same, but it just takes longer. I had a lot of writing I wanted to be doing this week, but I was glued to MSNBC and will be glued to MSNBC until we have a new president. But yeah, I think this year has been difficult in a very unique way. Just between, I know here in Los Angeles, you know, we've been shelter in place since March 12th, and I've been observing that. So that's been just difficult. I think, you know, being a writer is like a really solitary endeavor to begin with. And then when you can't have weekends to at least go outside and see what trees look like again, and to commune with friends and family, that's really difficult. So the isolation's been making it harder, and just everything that's been happening. Sometimes things are dark and you're not like, oh, I want to write a fluffy love story. And unfortunately this year it was like everything I had to do was the fluffiest of the fluffy. So it's been tough.
Casey?
Yeah. I mean, I think my first book, which obviously deals a lot with politics and American politics, I wrote most of that. I came up with the story, with the like idea for it, like in early 2016, and I wrote most of it in 2016. I wrote it all, most of it in 2017, but like 2016, 2017. And I think that you can tell from reading it that this was like a period of time in which like things had not gotten yet as bad as they were going to be. Because I think there's like a lot of idealism and optimism in that book that I don't know if I could muster up if I tried to write the same book right now or a year ago. And I think, that works out in its favor, because I think it is like a shot of hope that like people enjoy right now. I don't think I could have done it any later than I did. And I think my second book, which I wrote mostly in 2018 and 2019, is a lot more, not cynical, but like sort of darker and grittier, and more like it's about like a bunch of like broke queer 20-somethings in New York, and just kind of like hustling to make ends meet. And so I think, yeah, like I think for me, I do like to, like, I think my sort of goal is to write like joyful and hopeful romance, especially because I'm specifically writing like books about queer people for queer people. But it certainly like takes on a different flavor or different color or different shade with what I'm feeling at the time and what's happening in the world at the time. So then this year, oh God, trying to write in COVID, I don't know. I mean, I know that both Jasmine and Rebekah have done a lot of work this year, and I'm so jealous that you can get your brains to work, because mine is, I've struggled a lot.
Bills need to be paid, Casey. The bills need to be paid.
I know. I just like, yeah. But it is, I'm very like, I did manage to write a book this year, and I think that it was a lot more, me kind of doing like some internal work, and figuring, like, digging out things from like, when I was younger and writing that. And so I think that this, like, one thing about sheltering in place is that it like gives you time to sit and do like introspective work, and so that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard, I think. And I think that anybody who writes romance these days is to be commended for being able to, channel some hope and some joy and some love into work.
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard. Nothing has been easy about this year. I did not think I could write a book this year. Like, I knew I had a deadline, but I did not think that I was gonna get there. My plan had been to start writing a new thing. I was a writer in residence at a writing retreat in mid-March, and I was like, okay, great. I will like start outlining it then, and then I'll start writing it, the beginning of April. And then I got to the writing retreat, and like that day, the world fell apart. And so I did not start outlining anything, and I did not start writing for a long time. And even when I did start writing, I just sort of had to force myself to keep doing something every single day, even though I wasn't sure what I was doing. I didn't know where I was going with it. In the end, when I went back, I basically deleted almost all of those first 4 chapters, but they got me into a book finally. And I think eventually it became the thing that was keeping me going. Like, I just sort of kept working on it, then that's all I wanted to do. But it took a while. I mean, I went through, like, especially, April, May, and June were, not to say that any of the rest of this year has been easy. It's been all hard, but those months particularly were really hard because it was, it was the beginning. Nobody knew what was going on. I didn't know how to do anything. Like, how was I supposed to write a book about happiness when, like, nobody knew what was going to happen? And so I think, it was just a year where I had to keep like faking it till I made it, more or less. But yeah, it was hard to do everything this year.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people watching are like, yep, 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 yep. So now we have some questions which were submitted by some lovely readers. Our first question is for all of you from Shelby. Who are your favorite characters that you've written? How do you create chemistry between characters? So let's start with Jasmine and then Casey and then Rebekah.
You know, this is really hard because like I have just a deep love for all of my characters. It's also hard because I always feel the most attached to whoever I have just written. So currently my favorite characters are the people in the book that I just finished because I like just finished them and I'm still in love with them. But there's certain things that I love about every character. And I think, wait, what was I can't see the question again. What was the second part of the question?
It was, how do you create chemistry between your characters?
Oh, chemistry between them. You know, I think that is something that I think I work on a lot very specifically. I think it's something that I like have to really think about, you know, who is each of these people? And then what would they be drawn to in someone else? Like, why would this person be drawn to this other person? And then vice versa. And so I really have to think about the characters and figure them out. And a lot of times it's a lot of like writing and revision and no, that scene didn't work and keep going. Because you have to, like, in order to create chemistry between two people, you have to know who those people are and like care about them. Like I have to care about each character a lot in order to like really know why she would fall in love with him or why he would fall in love with her. And so so there's a lot of like character work and figuring that out, and then figuring out like what are the things that they would joke about with each other or find, you know, funny or charming or, you know, cute or sexy about one another. And so that is often like figuring that out is often my whole first draft. And then in the second draft, I can kind of figure out the plot.
Casey, can you answer the same question? Sorry.
Yeah, same question. I hate to say it's a book that nobody has really read yet, but my love interest in One Last Stop is like maybe my favorite character I've ever written. I don't know. But her name is Jane, and she's like a butch lesbian punk rock agitator who's displaced in time from the 1970s and wears a cool leather jacket and hangs out in the subway. And she's really cool and fun and has such a very long backstory. And just, it was so much fun to write her. She's got such an attitude and I love her. But yeah, I mean, as far as chemistry goes, God, I mean, I think that exactly what Jasmine said. I think it's not enough to just like point two characters who are hot at each other and be like, and then they kiss. I mean, it is enough sometimes. In like many situations, I do love that. But for me, I also really enjoy a story where you can really see what the characters see in each other. And I think also like looking at each character and like imagining like what would their ideal partner be like, and kind of like mirroring each other and like developing like, you know, their counterpart, their romantic interest. You know, like in my first book, I knew that both of my main characters would be like super smart and super into other smart people. And so I was like, okay, so they're going to like have nerdy conversations and you know, rib each other about being huge nerds, and they're gonna find that fun and attractive and sexy, you know. And I think that is kind of what chemistry is, because we're all humans who are into different things, and sometimes they're very specific things, and finding somebody else who checks that specific box for you is like where chemistry is. And so yeah, I think it's a lot of that, and a lot of you know, just developing that natural rhythm of connection, and you know, the pacing of the story and the little moments between the characters, really goes a long way.
Rebekah?
My favorite characters always end up being supporting characters. So in recent years, my favorite character was Zenny, who shows up in Rafe. I wrote her too well. I was writing her and I finished that book and I was like, crap, I have to give this woman a book. She was too good. And then in my cowboy books, my favorite character is actually not one of the brothers. It's their grandmother, Miss Leona. She's like Patti LaBelle dialed up to a 28. And just like the grandma, I think a lot of us really want. She's such a cool lady and has an awesome wig collection like Patti LaBelle, who I want to be when I grow up. As far as chemistry goes, again, I really like to think about where my characters are in their life and what they need. So, every story starts off with some sort of a problem or some sort of adventure they're about to go on, or some sort of way that they're coming together. And I think about, what the characters need. So, and if the boot fits, Sam is really struggling with being a Black actor who is making art that he wants to be proud of. He doesn't want to just be a supporting character in white savior stories, and he also doesn't want to he wants to make fun movies and he wants to make all kinds of different movies, but he doesn't want to make bad movies, and he doesn't want to make movies that make Black men look bad and make Black people look bad. So in Amanda, he gets someone who knows the industry, but also is going to give him tough love and tell him to kind of like suck it up and look at his privilege, but also, go for what he wants because he's in a position to do that. And for her, she just needs someone to be there for her. She's also, very smart, ambitious. She just needs someone to have her back. And Sam, again, is lucky enough to be in a position to support her, and her friends are in a position to be able to support her. So it was easy to build that chemistry, bringing two kind of sci-fi nerds together who have things in common, but are there for each other at the right place at the right time.
Great. This next question is for Jasmine from Pia. Did you plan on writing multiple books featuring the same characters from different vantage points? Or did you, when you wrote your first book, or did the idea occur along the way?
Not really. While I was writing The Wedding Date, I had the idea for the wedding party. There's a scene in The Wedding Date that is the first scene basically of the wedding party. They're at a party and two people interact for the first time, and I realized these two are going to hook up later. And so I knew I needed to write their own book. But other than that, I didn't really know. If I had planned it, I would have planned much better. I did not, so the wedding party happens. It starts during the wedding date. It goes over the course of the proposal, and then it ends afterwards. The timeline was a nightmare while I was writing that, partly because my production schedule for the books coming out was pretty close together. And so the proposal was already almost to print. When I was in the middle of writing Wedding Party, I was like, oh wait, I have to change certain things. And so that I would have planned better if I had known that I was going to do it all that way. There were certain times that I wrote other things I was like, I wish I had just made this other change. So there was I knew I wanted to write that. The proposal, I knew I liked Carlos. I knew was interested in writing a book about him, but I didn't really have a plan on that kind of almost until it happened. So yes, I wish I had thought that through a lot more in detail before I started writing, but it is what it is.
All right, we have a few more questions. We have to move a little quickly to make sure we get to all of them. Casey, I've got a question from Lori. How do you think the LGBTQIA+ romance landscape has evolved since you wrote Red, White, and Royal Blue, and how can it further evolve? And also, will we get a sequel, which I also would like to know the answer to.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm going to try and be fast for this 3-part question.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think I less view it as the romance community changing because of Red, White, and Royal Blue, and more of how how like what is the change that Red, White, and Royal Blue is a part of, you know? Because like I don't think that like it's ever, you know, you're never really the first to do anything. Like it's more like this is like the fruits of labors of you know all of these like you know hundreds of people over all of these years. And so I think more the better answer I think is that we're seeing more and more publishers like big five like traditional publishers seeing the potential of markets for queer romance stories, and that becoming an opportunity for more and more queer people to have you know publishers take a chance on them, which I think is amazing. And so I think that you know what I hope to see moving forward is for that to continue and for there to be this like enormous overstuffed overflowing shelf of queer books to choose from in the bookstore that is like crazy diverse and you know a million different stories and configurations of queer people doing like silly sexy horny things and having fun. And yeah, I mean that's kind of like what I hope for, and I think that like I feel encouraged by how I see the romance genre trending right now toward that. And then oh my god, there were so many parts of the question. What was the second part?
Just tell us about the sequel. Are we going to get a sequel?
Okay. Well, I can't. I mean, I don't at this moment. There is like no like official sequel. Like I'm not like sitting on like a secret 500-page sequel or something. I think that it's a world that I love, and I would love to explore it more. And I hope that I get the chance to do that. But I also have a lot of stories in mind that I want to tell, and so I hope so. Knock on wood, and we'll see.
I got a question for Rebekah. You touched on this a little bit before, and this question is from Kimberly. How is your approach different writing in the romance genre as an African American woman, and who is your target demographic?
Sure. So my main target demographic is people who want to read books that they enjoy, and books they feel entertained by. That's my main goal. I just want anyone who decides to read one of my books to pick it up and say, "Hey, that was fun." And then beyond that, you know, I'm writing for Black women. I'm writing for queer Black women. I'm writing for fat Black women, and just women of color in general who just really want to be loved on, and who are kind of feeling like, you know, friendship and love is where it's at, and family and that sort of thing. You know, I think that's people who want to feel that kind of warm hug from a story, from a point of view that is sometimes ignored.
Okay, one last question for all of you guys. So this is from Jennifer. What are some of your favorite swoon-worthy moments from your own books, and what are favorites from other books or movies? So we'll start with Casey, then Rebekah, then Jasmine, and this will be our last question.
Okay, well, I'll start with like one from a TV show, which is an emotional high that I think I'm always chasing anytime I write like a romantic, like star-crossed lovers scene, which is season 4 of Lost, the episode The Constant, in which Desmond, who's been like hopping through time and like lost in time, manages to like get his like long lost love Penny on the phone, and they have this like one moment where she's like, "I've been searching for you, I'm gonna find you," and he's like, "I'm on a boat, I don't know where I am," and she's like, "I know, I'm gonna come find you." And it's just like they're crying, I'm crying, everyone's crying. It is like this beautiful intense moment of like yearning and drama and like love across time and space, and that I think is like an emotional high that I'm constantly chasing. I think I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, I think okay, I can't say that because that's a spoiler, but there's this one great scene in Harrow the Ninth, which is the sequel to Gideon the Ninth, in which one character says to another, like, "I'll keep the home fires burning, honey," and that was such a romantic line. Anyway, I mean, in my own books, I think I am a sucker for a romantic gesture and like somebody going way over the top to like like confess their love. So like anytime in like Red, White, and Royal Blue that I have like somebody flying across the Atlantic dramatically to go and make a dramatic declaration, that is one of my favorite moments. So,
Rebekah?
I think I have one from If the Boot Fits, but I don't want to spoil it, so I'll pick another one from another book. In Zenny, there's a fake marriage situation, and the wedding is not going according to plan, and the heroine starts kind of losing it. And to distract her, the hero kind of literally sweeps her off her feet and kisses the hell out of her. And I thought that was a very swoony moment in one of my own books. In movies, I think the end of Brown Sugar, one of the classic Black rom-coms. Sorry if I'm spoiling it for anyone. Dre goes to I can't remember Shania Lathan's character's name, but he goes to her job, and she's doing a radio interview, and he holds up a note to the window at the radio station that's like, "Will you go out with me? Check yes or no," and it's like really cute. And then from a romance novel, in Beverly Jenkins Captured, the heroine is rescued by a pirate from slavery, and he takes her back to his island and brings her to like his villa and presents her with like a bathtub so she can finally like take a bath. And I thought that moment of like, not only have you been released from slavery, but you're like getting to relax, and this guy is like presenting you with like the first moment in your life where you've ever just been able to like chill. And that, I read that book years ago, and still to this moment I'm like, whew, that's love right there. That's love. So those are my swoony moments.
So, you know, as a, you know, person raised on like 80s movies, look, this is a very problematic fave now. However, the end of 16 Candles,
I knew you were
when
going to say 16 Candles.
Out of church, and then she sees him and like points at me. I mean, do I have to say anything more? Like that? It's incredible. The rest of the movie needs some work, but that moment at the end, I just love it. And I feel like, yes, I feel like many of us are like chasing those little moments, like in all of our books. For me, there is I guess this is a little spoiler for Party of Two, but there's a moment where he flies across the country just to see her for a few hours. And I actually stole that from a friend of mine who like told a story about the guy that she was dating, and they were living in different places. And she just like said offhand how she wished she could see him. And he like immediately came to her, and I was like, that's such a good story. I'm taking it. And so I took that story for that book.
Oh my God. What a great note to end on. You guys, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you, Rebekah, Jasmine, and Casey for joining us tonight. Please remember to support our book-selling partner, The Ripped Bodice. Order from them and you can receive a signed book plate. Thank you all, and have a very romantic evening.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.